Welcome, everybody, to this Saturday afternoon edition of Alley Talk. My name is Matt Watson, a Phillies beat writer for Metro Philadelphia and Philly Sports Network, and happy to come on here today to talk Phillies baseball with you this afternoon. So come on in, hop in. Feel free to be active in the chat this afternoon as we're going to talk Phillies baseball. And the topic of conversation today surrounds Dave Dombroski and his tenure in Philadelphia as the Phillies president of baseball operations. And so my idea was to take a look back at Dombrowski's signings, trades, and the overall team success that they've had in the last couple of years. And so we're going to take a look at some of those top, major league level deals and just assess overall what we think of Dave Dombrowski's tenure in Philadelphia so far. So I know this off season, a lot of people have been frustrated with the lack of big moves out of Philadelphia. And I think we're going to talk about that today. So yeah, like I said, feel free to let me know how you feel about Dave Dombrowski. And I would like to say, give me a grade. How has Dave Dombrowski done in his tenure in Philadelphia? Comment a grade as to what you think he has done, and maybe I could change your opinion, good or worse, by the time that this conversation is over today. So appreciate everybody for hopping on. As always, you can find me at Matt Watson Media on all social platforms, as well as the Philadelphia Sports Network team. We are on X, we are on Blue Sky, you name it, we're on it. So uh, feel free to hop on and enjoy the show. So today I'm going to pull up this little document that I made this afternoon, and we're just going to be going over, like I said, Dave Dombrowski and what he has done so far. And so kind of to kick things off, I wanted to give a little bit of background. So it was the end of the 2020 season. It was the COVID year. There was an expanded playoff, and the world was upside down. And so the Phillies were still in the Matt Klentak regime. And John Middleton decided he needed to make a move. The Phillies did not make the expanded playoff. I believe they finished fourth that year in the National League East. And so things just were looking bleak. They had just signed Bryce Harper a few years ago, made a few moves, but it was not paying off. So heading into 2021, the Phillies signed Dave Dombrowski to be the president of baseball operations. John Middleton had to pull teeth to get Dombrowski to come for an interview. Dave was focused on an expansion team in Nashville that he was looking to help run. But the Phillies were able to successfully get Dombrowski kind of out of a quasi-retirement to run the franchise, and things have turned around quite a bit since then. So kind of to start things off here, we're going to go back to the 2021 season with the Phillies. And so heading into that year, the Phillies made a couple signings, the biggest being re-signing JT Realmuto to a 5-year extension. Realmuto came over in 2019 as a part of the trade with the Marlins that saw Sixto Sanchez and Jorge Alfaro go to Miami in return for JT Realmuto. And at the end of the 2020 season, the big kind of topic around Phillies was, will they re-sign JT Realmuto? And so Dombrowski comes in, and Realmuto re-signs 5 years, $115 million. And that was kind of the big move of the 2021 offseason. They brought in Didi Gregorius to play shortstop. Mind you, they had kind of a revolving door at that position for a while there. Freddie Galvis played a few years at shortstop. J.P. Crawford, Scott Kingery had a little bit of a run after his debut. So quite a few different people were playing shortstop for the Phillies, but not at a successful rate. And so they bring in Didi on a 2-year deal from New York to try and stabilize the position. They signed reliever Archie Bradley to a 1-year deal. Matt Moore and Chase Anderson, who are two swing guys, started some games and came out of the bullpen as well to 1-year contracts. And Brad Miller on another stint with the Phillies back in 2021. Miller came in, was a left-handed bat, played first base, DH, that sort of thing for the Phils. So heading into the 2021 season, these were the moves that Dombrowski had made to try and amp the Phillies up and push them closer to a playoff appearance. At this point, they had not been in the playoffs in over a decade. A couple of trades that they made heading into the season, they acquired Jose Alvarado for Garrett Clevenger from the Tampa Bay Rays and Sam Coonrod from the San Francisco Giants in return for Carson Ragsdale. And so those were the moves heading into the season. 2021, the Phillies were playing well. They were in the division race for the most part of the season. And around the trade deadline, the Phillies decided to pull a couple moves. They reacquired Freddie Galvis, but this time from the Baltimore Orioles in return for minor leaguer Tyler Birch. And they acquired Kyle Gibson, Ian Kennedy, and Hans Krause for Spencer Howard, Kevin Gowdy, and Josh Gessner in a deal with the Texas Rangers. And I would like, in my opinion, I feel as a clear winner for the Phillies. They had Gibson for 2 seasons. Kennedy came in as a reliever in that 2021 season, and Hans Krause never really panned out to anything. But you could say the same for Spencer Howard and the other prospects that they traded in return for the Gibson deal. So Galvis came in, played shortstop a bit. I believe Didi was hurt. The Phillies offense was struggling, and I know heading into the late 2021 season, Hoskins went down with an injury, and this was the year that Bryce Harper won MVP. So Bryce was chugging along late August, September, trying to get the Phillies into the playoff push. Unfortunately, another September collapse, which had been far too common at this point in time with the Phillies, um, transpired. They finished second in the National League East to the Atlanta Braves, who would go on to win the World Series without Ronald Acuna Jr. So the Phillies had finished second that year, missed the playoffs, but Bryce Harper did win the MVP. So, that first season, Dave Dombroski comes in that offseason, makes a few small moves with the different one-year deals, and then makes the big splash, bringing back JT Realmuto. The trades that he made, Jose Alvarado, I think has panned out quite well for him. The Sam Coonrod trade, I wouldn't call it necessarily a win for the Phillies, but it wasn't a loss of a deal either. It was just kind of a, hey, it's a depth move overall. Freddie Galvis was another move that I wouldn't call it a win necessarily, but it was a move that they made. It was what it was, and it has hurt them in a sense. And then the Kyle Gibson trade is how I'll frame it, because Gibson was the big piece in that deal. And I overall think that was a win for the Phillies. They moved off of Spencer Howard, who turned out to be nothing in Major League Baseball. Kyle Gibson gave the Phillies a year and a half of good quality baseball, and so that's kind of how that season transpired. They did miss the playoffs, but it did allow them to ammo up and get ready for the following season. So heading into 2022, the Phillies had made a few different moves heading into that season. So the big splashes of the offseason were signing Nick Castellanos and Kyle Schwarber to 2 contracts. Castellanos for 5 years, $100 million. Schwarber for 4 years, $79 million. And then a couple other one-off moves: Corey Knebel, Johan Camargo, and Jerry Familia, along with Brad Hand, to kind of reamp the bullpen, which in 2020, you'll remember the Phillies bullpen was not strong. It was one of the worst in baseball. It had improved in 2021, and then trying to really load up in 2022 is kind of how they approached it. So just kind of going off the top here, I think the Nick Castellanos and Kyle Schwarber moves, you can really speak for themselves. Castellanos struggled in his first year with the Phillies, but overall he's been a pivotal member of the team. The clutch hits against the Mets this past postseason. Castellanos, I know, got off to the slow start in Philadelphia, but I think overall his tenure here has been successful. You cannot say enough good things about Kyle Schwarber in his time with Philly. His past 3 years have been remarkable. A few all-star appearances. Schwarber's had, I think, the second most home runs in baseball since joining the Phillies. So overall, he has done a tremendous job, and I think it was another great signing by Dave Dombroski. And then kind of, moving into those bullpen moves, Brad Hand pitched very well for the Phillies in 2022. I know a lot of people aren't big Brad Hand fans, and he was not great in high leverage situations. But if you go back and you really look at how he performed for most of the regular season, in fact, I think Brad Hand for a $6 million 1-year deal was a very good signing by Dave Dombroski. Jerry's Familia was not, and they moved off of him very quickly. He did not. He really did not have his stuff, in a sense. He could not locate. He could not get out of. Could not get out of anything. Did not matter if it was high leverage or low leverage. Jerry's Familia was not very successful, so the Phillies cut bait with him pretty early, and it was one of the first times in a while that the team had showed willingness to just cut bait with a guy that they paid a lot of money for. And I say a lot of money. 6 years for 1 year is not a lot in the long term, but overall, I think it's still a pretty solid amount. And then Johan Camargo, I think everybody can remember Johan Camargo and really appreciate what he did. A 1 year, $1.4 million deal. It was a solid depth piece, played all around the infield, kind of like the role that Edmundo Sosa has now for the club. So I think the Johan Camargo signing is a very underrated one in Dombrowski's tenure, but overall, it is also a $1.4 million deal. So you're not lighting the world on fire with that one. And then Corey Knebel signed a 1 year, $10 million deal that offseason. He came in and he started the year off as the Phillies closer, and he did a nice job for the most part. He did get injured, kind of derailing the rest of his tenure in Philadelphia. But overall, another strong signing, and this is kind of continuing the trend Dombrowski has, where he likes to sign 1 year veteran relievers to prove it deals, as you can see with Hand and Familia, Knebel, and some of the ones he's made in recent years as well. So moving over to trades, he made a few trades I wanted to point out. Like I said, I only really went for the major league level deals that he made, but overall, Nick Nelson and Donnie Sands he acquired from the Yankees for TJ Rumfield and Joel Valdez in a move, and I think the Phillies won that trade. Nick Nelson has been a great piece for them, and I say great in the sense that he has played a great role for them. He's been an innings eater, has made spot starts, comes out of the pen in cleanup games. So in a deal where you really give up nothing, for him. I think he's been a contributor at the major league level, and I think Nick Nelson was a solid trade acquisition. I think it's an underrated move by Dombrowski to acquire Nick Nelson, and I don't believe he's with the system in the system at this point. He spent mostly all of last year in the minor leagues, but overall, I think Nick Nelson was a solid pickup. And then Garrett Stubbs. He acquired Garrett Stubbs from the Astros, who were coming off a World Series appearance for Logan Cerny, a minor league prospect that really has not panned out in baseball. But I mean, Stubbs has changed the culture in Philadelphia. I know people were kind of frustrated after his comments in the or the NLCS, the Diamondbacks, kind of changing the tune on Stubbs a little bit. And then I know last year he kind of lost favor amongst the fan base a little bit, but he's been a quality backup catcher for the Phillies for the last 3 years. He is under contract this year. He signed a 1-year extension, and he's going to have to kind of earn his job against Rafael Marchand in the spring training. But overall, I think Stubbs, you require Stubbs, who's been a major league contributor for the last few years, for a prospect that hasn't panned out for Houston. It was another great move by Dombroski. And then James Norwood, another example of a reliever who did not have his stuff anymore. The Phillies sent another minor league prospect, this time to San Diego for Norwood. And again, he did not pan out, but in a sense, it was a low risk, high reward move. And I did want to highlight not every move he's made has been, a home run. So I wanted to make sure we listed out the good and the bad here. But all right. And then going into the trade deadline. So the Phillies are competing, they're thriving, they are fighting for a playoff spot. And the Phillies made 4 moves at that trade deadline. They acquired Edmundo Sosa from the Cardinals for Jojo Romero. And at this time, Sosa really came in to be he was more of a bench piece, which has been to this day. But Sosa came in, he was coming in late in games a lot for Alec Boehm defensively, pinch runner, first guy off the bench. So the Phillies add Sosa to really strengthen the bench. Stott was the shortstop at this time. Gene Segura was at second. So Sosa was plugging and playing wherever he needed to go, but he was coming off the bench and giving the Phillies a high quality at bat and great defense. So another deal in which I think the Phillies have won. Jojo Romero at that time was a struggling starter who moved to the bullpen. I think he's kind of revived his career. He had a really nice season last year with the Cardinals. So overall, I think it was a quality move from Dave Dombroski. And I think it worked out for the Cardinals too. So a win-win in that regard. His second move was trading trading for David Robertson. He gave up minor league pitching prospect Ben Brown, who has flashed a little bit with the Cubs. He's kind of like a fifth starter at this point in his career, but he has showed a little bit of promise. Phillies get Robertson and strengthen the back end of their bullpen. At that time, you had Jose Alvarado and Sir Anthony Dominguez. You bring in David Robertson, who pitched in a lot of high leverage situations in the playoffs, down the stretch of the regular season. He came in, I think, his second, 2 days after being acquired, comes in, flies down to Atlanta, and his first game doesn't even have his red cleats yet. He's still wearing his Cubs, his Cubs gear basically with his Phillies jersey, and he gets to save it in Atlanta against the Braves in a big situation. So I think the David Robertson trade, while you would like to have Ben Brown in your system still, showing that he's going to be a major league caliber pitcher, I think making the move for David Robertson at the time was smart. It gave you another arm you can use in the back end of the bullpen. And Robertson did come in that ninth inning in the Bedlam of the Bank game. And he started that inning that Ranger Suarez ended up closing. But another example of a guy that they gave a high leverage situation to. So I think that move paid off for Dombrowski. Brandon Marsh. And while these were 2 separate moves technically, but it was with the Angels, so you can kind of combine it as one move. But traded Logan O'Hoppe, the top catching prospect in the system, to the Angels for Brandon Marsh. O'Hoppe has been phenomenal with the Angels. He did get banged up a bit and has missed some time, but overall, he's been a very high quality player. And I suspect he's going to be a top 10 catcher for a while in Major League Baseball. And they traded him and obviously got Brandon Marsh, who started in center field after they acquired him. Marsh has been left field, center field for the last few years, has been a pivotal member of the Phillies daycare, and has had a lot of great moments in Philadelphia. But another guy kind of at the end of last year who people are saying we need to see more from Marsh, or some people were floating him out there as a potential trade option. But I think the Marsh for O'Hoppe move was smart at the time, and I think it still pays off to this day. O'Hoppe was blocked by JT Realmuto, so you're not going to get anything out of him in a sense unless you move off of JT, which in hindsight, with Realmuto being a free agent at the end of this season, you could certainly say that O'Hoppe would be nice to have. But for the time being, the Phillies were trying to make a playoff push for the first time in over a decade, and Brandon Marsh ended up catching that last ball in Houston to clinch a playoff berth. So I think the move has worked out overall. Marsh has been a major league contributor since coming to Philadelphia, and I think that he's going to have a lot to prove in 2025. But overall, another move that I think was smart and a positive for Dave Dombrowski. And then the last one was Noah Syndergaard, the veteran pitcher who has gone out to the Angels to try and revive his career after battling some Tommy John issues with the Mets. The Phillies dealt former top prospect Mickey Moniak and minor leaguer Jidel Sanchez to the Angels in that deal. Moniak has actually turned his career around a little bit with the Angels. He typically only faces right-handed pitching as a left-handed outfielder, but he's had some highlighted moments with the Angels, and he's been able to stick at the major league level since then, which I think has been really nice to see for him, a guy who many people feel as though was a bust in Philadelphia. But overall, I think the move for Syndergaard, while Syndergaard was only there for the rest of the 2022 season, he did start a couple playoff games. He started in Game 5 of the World Series for the Phillies, more as an opener than a traditional starter. But I think the acquisition of Noah Syndergaard was pretty solid overall. So, I think another strong move. I think all 4 moves at the deadline that Dave Dombrowski made in 2022 paid off, and all 4 players had played pivotal roles for the team heading into that World Series. And they probably don't get to that World Series without contributions from each guy. So I think 2022, the Phillies finished 87 and 75, third in the National League that year. Both the Braves and Mets won over 100 games. But the Phillies did obviously win the National League. They went to the World Series. They lost the Astros in 6. And a key move that I wouldn't necessarily give Dave Dombrowski all the credit in the world for this, but he did select Rob Thompson to be Joe Girardi's replacement midseason when the team was struggling. And that move has paid off tenfold. Thompson has been a fantastic manager for the club, and he's gotten to the playoffs in every year of his tenure. So while it's not necessarily an on-paper move, it's more of a culture move and a clubhouse move. I think that the promotion of Rob Thompson after letting go Joe Girardi is something that you need to note here when talking about Dave Dombrowski. And so then heading into 2023, the Phillies had just gotten to the World Series, and now the expectation is they need to get back. So that offseason, the Phillies go out and they make a couple moves. The big move, obviously, is signing Trey Turner to an 11-year, $300 million contract, sliding Bryson Stott over to second base. You now pair Turner with Harper, Romuto, Schwarber, Castellanos, and the Phillies. And Phillies fans were ecstatic with this move. They got the top shortstop on the market. It wasn't necessarily, I wouldn't call it a position of need, but they had a need in the middle infield. Gene Segura's contract had been up at this point. And so you could keep Stott shortstop and go out there second baseman, or you could slide Stott to second and sign a shortstop. At that time, it was Turner, Dansby Swanson, Xander Bogaerts, and I want to say Javier Baez was the other option. I know there was a big 4 in terms of shortstops that year. So the Phillies clearly got the best in Trey Turner. And again, another guy who did not have a hot start to his career like Castellanos. I think Turner's overall numbers have really bounced back. His playoffs were unfortunately quiet for the team, but he performed really well in the 2023 playoffs, which we are discussing here. So 2023, the big move was adding Trey Turner. Other moves include Matt Strahm to a 2-year, $15 million deal. And when that contract happened, a lot of people around baseball thought that the Phillies ruined the relief market. They felt giving Strahm $7.5 million a year was an awful deal. They thought it was an overpay. And it's been quite the opposite. Strahm has been lights out since coming to Philly. In 2023, he started some games when the rotation depth was light. And then since then, moved to the back end of the bullpen. Strahm was on All-Star this season. And I think overall, he did just sign, I believe he signed an extension, if I remember correctly, for another year or two. But Strahm, 2 years, $15 million is a steal at this point. And I just wanted to point out the fact that a lot of people at the time thought it was an overpay. So overall, quite a good move from Dave Dombrowski there. But then, of course, that leads to the Taijuan Walker signing, which I know is probably the top move that people discuss when they discuss Dave Dombrowski at this point is Taijuan Walker and the 4-year, $72 million contract that he signed him to. Walker has not been worth that deal whatsoever. And to this point, 2023, he was okay. But last year, he was unpitchable. And heading into this upcoming season, Dombrowski's made it clear, Rob Thompson's made it clear that Taijuan does not have a guaranteed job when, spring training breaks this year. They've talked about how Walker's going to have to prove that he has refound his stuff. His velocity decreased, his command decreased, and quite frankly, you could not put him on the mound at the end of the last season. So that Walker contract is looking like an albatross at this point. He still has half that deal left, 2 years, $36 million a year. And he's making 18 a season, so it's not like you could just really cut bait with him. Although the Phillies, like I said, have proven to do so. So if you cut bait with Taijuan Walker after the end of spring training, you're on the hook for $36 million over the next 2 years combined. I don't know if the Phillies want to necessarily cut him. I think they're really hoping he can come into spring training and bank on the fact that he's bounced back. He's refound something, and whether it's a fit starter or if it's a long reliever, as long as they can make an argument to keep him on the roster, I think they're going to keep him on the roster. And so, as we're talking about how has Dave Dombroski done in his tenure, I think overall he's made some good moves. But if you really want to sink your teeth into it, the Taijuan Walker move is definitely the worst deal he has made thus far. And so that was heading into the 2023 season. And then just kind of a couple trades that Dombrowski had made into the year. They acquired Gregory Soto and Cody Clemens from the Detroit Tigers for Nick Maton, Matt Vierling, and Donnie Sands, who he had gotten the year prior in the Nick Nelson deal. And so I think that's another, feather in Dave Dombrowski's cap there. Soto was okay in Philly. They were acquiring him that deal. Clemens kind of came with him, but it turned out to be quite the opposite. Cody Clemens has been quite a stud in a Phillies uniform. He has had, countless, high leverage situations where he's come through, pinch hit situations, end of game situations, walk-offs, you name it. He's been able to play all around the infield, played a little bit of outfield for the team. And despite the fact that he spent time in AAA because it's quite a stacked roster, he has never let that discourage him. Every time he comes back up to the team, he plays incredibly well. And he's a guy who's going to be competing in spring training for a roster spot. But I think at the time it was the Gregory Soto trade. Phillies were trying to amp up their bullpen. And overall, it was the Cody Clemens trade is how that worked out. And Matt Vierling has, started with Detroit ever since that deal. He started in the postseason for them. So you could really say it was, a win for the Tigers too in that regard. Maton no longer with the organization, and I'm not 100% sure Donnie Sands is either. But if you really kind of cut away all the bits of this deal, Cody Clemens for Matt Vierling, it's worked out for both teams. So I just think adding Cody Clemens in that deal ended up being bigger than anybody would have realized. They acquired Junior Marte from the San Francisco Giants in a deal for Eric Miller. Marte's had pitched well in his time with the Phillies. He, I believe, signed with the Oakland A's this offseason. There was a West Coast team, if I remember correctly. But Marte came in. He was a good, death piece in the back of the bullpen. Bounced between AAA and the big leagues for the last few seasons while he was here. Eric Miller, the pitcher that the Phillies dealt to the Giants in the trade, was a starter in the Phillies system at the time, has since converted to a reliever with the Giants, and he's actually been pretty solid for them. I think if the Phillies if you could say, would the Phillies do this one over, they might. I think Miller has higher upside overall than Marte, but Marte filled a role for the team. And so I think at the time, it was a quality trade. And so, in hindsight, yeah, Eric Miller would probably be a better fit with the Phillies now than Junior Marte, but overall, it was a solid move at the time. And then Christian Pache for Billy Sullivan in a deal with the A's. Pache was obviously let go. Well, not let go, but dealt at the trade deadline this past season in the deal with the Baltimore Orioles. But I think at the time it was a prospect who was once highly touted in the Braves system. Couldn't hang on with the A's, and the Phillies gave him a shot. Pache did play quite a bit in his time with the Phillies between left and center field. Never really did amount to the prospect he once was thought of. So those were the moves heading into the 2023 season. The Phillies started slow again, but they really did start to pick it up in June, especially with the bat of Kyle Schwarber heating up. Overall, they finished second in the National League East again. And then they lost to the Diamondbacks in the LCS. Now, this is where I did want to kind of go. We talked about how the Walker deal was not good, and it's probably the defining deal of Dombrowski's tenure in terms of a negative. But his trade deadline in 2023 is another example of a negative, in my opinion. So they go out and acquire Michael Lorenzen from the Detroit Tigers for Hao Yu Lee, an infield prospect in their system. Lorenzen threw the no-hitter which was an awesome moment in Phillies history. And he pitched pretty well. The Phillies went to a 6-man rotation. Lorenzen did pitch a little bit in the postseason, but he was really kind of more of a move to help them get to the end of the year and keep their guys fresh, Nola Wheeler specifically, rather than adding a guy at the deadline to make a difference in the postseason. And then Rodolfo Castro for Bailey Falter basically replaced, Falter with Lorenzen. And Castro played maybe a handful of games with the Phillies and never really caught on. Just a guy who maybe potential infield depth, but the move just did not work. And it was a trade deadline, in my opinion, that was wasted by the Phillies. You just make the World Series the year prior, and now you are heading into a year where, hey, everybody's expecting you to win a division, go to the playoffs, go back to the World Series. And while the team was playing well at this point, they could have gone out there and made a bigger move. And I don't know what that move is. I don't know what the markets were looking like. Other teams made trades to help push them towards the World Series, including the Arizona Diamondbacks, who eliminated the Phillies. But just overall, I mean, the Phillies had a chance to kind of put the dagger in it in a way, and make a move that's going to help put them over the top, and they did not. So it was a poor deadline, in my opinion. And I think 2022 showed you, the success of Dombroski. I think 2023 was an example of he got Strom right, he got Turner right, Walker he did not. Kimbrel was better than most will give him credit for. And a couple of the trades panned out for him as well. But I just think he didn't have that home run hit. He had a couple singles, a double, maybe even a triple. I'd call Strom a triple, but I would not sit here and say that he nailed the trade deadline. And I think that was a detriment to them overall. So then we head into 2024, this past season, where the Phillies won 95 games. They won the National League East for the first time since 2011, but then they lost in the second round of the playoffs to the New York Mets. They had 8 All-Stars this past year, second best record in baseball, but it did not amount to a World Series title. And so I think that was, that's going to be another knock against Dombroski, despite the fact that I think that he had assembled a proper club. Overall, the team just did not play well. But now you're starting to look at a couple moves again that didn't really pan out. Whit Merrifield, a 1-year deal this past all season. Merrifield did not do well. I mean, the Phillies ended up cutting him, and they went on a bit of a downswing after that, which I don't think is related. But Merrifield was signed to be a utility type player, to play the infield, to play the outfield, to spell at bats for Stott and Marsh against left-handed pitching. Merrifield is a former All-Star, and he just did not play like it. And I understood that he went from starting every day in Toronto to a bench/utility role with the Phillies, where he was only starting a few times a week. But the Merrifield deal just did not pan out. They had to cut him in midseason, which proves that it did not work out. And overall, it's just another sticking point when people go, Dave Dombroski hasn't done a good job. They bring up Whit Merrifield. They bring up the Taijuan Walker deals. So just back-to-back off seasons of a swing and a miss. And then you go to Spencer Turnbull, 1 year, $2 million. Turnbull was fantastic for that value. He started towards the beginning of the year. He started games and did phenomenal. An unfortunate injury kind of derailed the rest of his season. But 1 year, $2 million for Spencer Turnbull was a smashing success for the amount of games that they got out of him. And I think it was a low, under the radar move that Dombroski thrives in. And he did a nice job. And I would say the same with Colby Allard. 1 year, $1 million. Allard bounced between AAA and a starter in the big leagues. Towards the end of the season, he had a few opportunities to start every 5th day when the Phillies just kept running different pitchers out there. But overall, I think Allard for $1 million was a good signing, and it worked out quite well. And so the Phillies didn't really make any big trades heading into the season. During the middle of the year, they acquired Buddy Kennedy from the Tigers for cash. Kennedy had a couple highlight moments playing for his hometown team this season, which was cool. Another guy that's going to be competing for a job in spring training. But just a depth move, a solid depth move. And then we get to the trade deadline, which has been highly discussed. Austin Hayes for Christian Pasha and Sir Anthony Dominguez in a deal with the Orioles. Hayes did not work. I mean, he came in to be the starting left fielder, and he could not stay healthy, unfortunately, for him and for the Phillies. And in doing so, they gave up Sir Anthony Dominguez, who had struggled for most of the year. He just did not have that magic like he did in 2022. And they move off of Pasha as well to kind of create that outfield spot. So in a 1-for-1 move, I think the Orioles won this trade Anthony pitched very well when he got over to Baltimore. He pitched in some high leverage spots for them, kind of became their de facto closer towards the end of the year, and he pitched in the playoffs for them. So Hayes really did not make a mark in the postseason with the Phillies or in the regular season for that matter. So I think this was a loss in terms of a trade, like a straight up trade grade. I would give the Phillies a C minus on this. They did not do well. And then the next move that they made was acquiring Carlos Estevez for George Clausen and Samuel Aldit-Harry within a deal with the Angels. Two solid pitching prospects from the Phillies minor league system. I think Clausen is going to be the better of the two. They already called Sam up to the big leagues at the end of last year, despite never pitching in AAA. The Angels are not known for developing pitchers, so I do hope that it works out for them. And Carlos Estevez was solid with the Phillies. I did not personally feel as though he should have been the closer. I think that should have gone to Jeff Hoffman. Estevez was a flamethrower. He could hit 100 on the gun with his fastball. But, unfortunately for him, he allows too much contact, in my opinion. Guys do get on against Carlos Estevez, which creates, higher leverage situations than they really need to be. Overall, I think it was a good move for the Phillies. They might have overpaid slightly, depending on how these two pitchers work out with the Angels, especially with the Estevez walking in free agency. And it does not appear like the Phillies are going to bring him back. But overall, I think it was a smart move. I mean, they needed to add to the bullpen, especially after dealing Sir Anthony Dominguez. So, with that being said, I think the Estevez move was the right move. We'll see over time if that works out for them. And then another move, a kind of corresponding move with the Orioles, was acquiring Seth Johnson, who was a highly touted prospect with the Orioles, for Gregory Soto. Baltimore is looking to really amp up their bullpen, and Gregory Soto quietly had asked out of Philadelphia. He wanted to be the closer here. Did not feel like he was getting the opportunity to showcase that he could be a closer. And personally, I don't think he did well in the opportunities that he did have. So the Phillies were right to make this move. Acquiring Johnson was a steal, in my opinion. He made one start against the Marlins this year, kind of in that random shuffle of fifth starters. But I think that move is going to pay off for the Phillies over time. And I do not believe Soto's with the team at this point. So I think that was a win in terms of trades for Dombroski. And then the final one, adding Tanner Banks. They had to replace Soto. So they acquired Tanner Banks from the White Sox right as the deadline was expiring for minor league prospect William Bergolla. I think that was a fine move. You have Banks for the season as well from the left-handed side. Low leverage situation, can give you an inning or two if needed. He performed fine with the Phillies, and I don't think he was, he was not brought in to be, a closer or high leverage guy. So he's filled his role quite well. But yeah, again, I think back-to-back trade deadlines rather. The Phillies just not going for the home run. And I understand markets have been high and things of that nature, but overall, I just think 2 opportunities in a row the Phillies have had a chance to really put things away. I mean, they at this point we're in first place in the division with relatively ease. They're going to coast through the rest of the season. They were really fighting for that first round bye when it came down to it, but even then, Milwaukee did not really push them towards the end of the season for it. So the Phillies felt comfortable with the team that they had. They had the best team in baseball at the trade deadline, but unfortunately, they just could not. They just could not play well when it mattered most. The second half of the season, they were an average team at best, and I think a failure to recognize that and a failure to really shake things up and go out and add a guy who could have made a big difference. There was talks and kind of reports confirmed that they had a deal in place for Garrett Crochet from the White Sox. They refused to give up Andrew Painter in that deal. You would have seen Justin Crawford and Aidan Miller in Chicago in that, with that deal with the White Sox, and Crochet would have joined the Phillies starting rotation. But as the playoffs proved, it wasn't the rotation that really struggled. It was the bullpen, and it was the starting lineup that could not produce runs nor prevent them. The bullpen, which was the best in baseball, you make a couple of these minor shakeups, and you add Estevez and Banks, but you didn't. I mean, in a sense, those guys did not perform when you needed them the most, and unfortunately for the Phillies, that saw their demise against the Mets in the wild or the division series rather, which still stings with a lot of people today. So, I think if you look at 2024 as a whole, not the best year, and I think it's kind of almost like the Phillies playoffs in a sense. 2022 was Dombroski's best. They went to the World Series. 2023 was not as good as the year prior. They only made it to the championship series, and this past year, another step back, and I think you see that in the playoffs. Not saying that he directly has a result over what's going to happen in terms of postseason and on-field success. But I just think you're starting to see a bit of a trend. The Phillies have a pretty set lineup and a pretty set rotation of guys that it's harder to make a lot of the bigger moves. And I think while it's proving to be more difficult, the Phillies require it. I think at this point they needed to make a splash at the deadline, and they haven't so far. So 2025, we'll see where they're at and whether or not they go hard at the trade deadline. But and then I did want to kind of take us to 2025. The Phillies have made a few signings: Jordan Romano, Max Kepler, Joe Ross, all to 1-year contracts. A couple small little deals. They acquired Devin Sweet, Nelson Alvarez, and cash deals with the Rays and Tigers. Then obviously the big trade: Jesus Luzardo and Paul McIntosh for Starlin Caba, the Phillies' 5th prospect, and Marion Boyd, who I believe was their 22nd ranked prospects per MLB.com, and a deal with the Marlins. And I mean, I like the Romano signing. I like the Kepler signing. I like the Ross signing, and I like the Luzardo deal. I think so far they have done the right things to strengthen their team, but a lot of fans are upset they haven't been in the market for these big guys. Like last night, Corbin Burns signed with the Diamondbacks. Could you imagine a rotation of Wheeler, Burns, Nola, Sanchez, and a guy like Jesus Luzardo? That would be incredible. But the Phillies have not been in on the big name guys. A lot of these big players, people wanted them to go get Juan Soto. That was never going to happen. People wanted them in moves for like Tyler O'Neill, who I thought would be a good fit, or Teoscar Hernandez to play left field. They decided they're going to go with Max Kepler. So another year so far where the Phillies are making 1-year moves. They have a lot of money coming off the books at the end of this upcoming season. And they still have a lot of their top prospects. Caba was their 5th ranked. You move him to Miami, but he's still young. I believe he's 18, 19. So he has quite a bit of time before he gets to the big leagues. But I think the Phillies are putting themselves in a good position, and it's going to come down to the guys that they have, the Harpers, the Wheelers. Those are the guys who have to perform when the lights are the brightest. And I think the Phillies are going to be a playoff team again this upcoming year. The division is going to be tougher. The Mets loaded up. The Braves are going to get healthy. They're going to get Strider and Acuna back. So it's going to be a tight race for the National League East. There's only the 3 wild card spots. The Giants have gotten better. The Diamondbacks have gotten better. The Cubs have gotten better. So some of these teams that are going to be competing with you for the wild card are loading up. So overall, I think the Phillies are still in a great spot. I would still consider them the 2nd best team in the National League behind the Los Angeles Dodgers. But we're getting to a point where the National League is starting to get a little stacked. And I think overall, the Phillies need to make sure that they're keeping their eye on the markets. The trade deadline is a must for them this season. They have to make a splash if they want to push for the World Series. It does not matter if they have the best record in baseball at the deadline again, or if they're on the outside looking in. They need to make a splash overall if they think they are going to compete for a World Series title. So that is kind of where Dave Dombroski has put us thus far. I think overall, he's done quite a good job as president of baseball operations with the Phillies. I think he started off really hot, and I think 2022 has been his best year in both trades and signings. 2023 was okay. The Turner deal, I still think it's a good contract. Matt Strahm was an absolute steal that year. But then the Taijuan Walker deal, it kind of soils it quite a bit. And then last year, Whit Merrifield being your top signing. Don't think overall Whit Merrifield being the banner of the 2020, heading into 2024 worked out for the Phillies overall. So Dombrowski has been good in his tenure. I wouldn't call him great, but the Phillies have gone to the playoffs the last 3 years. They just won the National League East for the first time in over a decade. They have played really well under the Dombrowski and Thompson regime. But the 2025 season is going to be very important. The Phillies need to take the next step. They cannot, if they don't win the division, they can't get bounced in the first or second round. It has to be an appearance in the championship series, in my opinion, to call it a success. An appearance of the World Series would certainly be a success, and obviously winning the World Series, which is their goal. It's going to be World Series or bust from John Middleton on down. But what do the Phillies do to make that happen remains to be seen. I like what they've done so far in 2025. You had a solid reliever in Romano. You had a solid bat in Max Kepler, who they think could bounce back. Joe Ross is a swing man, which Dombrowski had mentioned they were looking for. Fantastic fit. You're going to see more of him in the bullpen than anything else, but he thrived in Milwaukee's bullpen last year, pitched in the playoffs, which was nice. And the Jesus Luzardo deal was fantastic. I think he's going to pitch really well in Phillies uniform. He's not going to be asked to do a lot with that rotation with Wheeler and Nola and Sanchez anchoring it. Suarez has to prove that he still can be trusted over a long season. His injuries have really derailed what I would say has been a successful tenure. So, but yeah, overall, I think Dave Dombrowski's done quite a good job. If I were to give him a letter grade, I would give him a B. I would give him a B. I think had the Phillies gone to the NLCS this year, I could have given him a B plus. They've tasted glory, but they haven't quite gotten there. So we will see what the Phillies can do in 2025. Feel free to give me your thoughts on how Dombrowski's done in Philadelphia, not just this offseason, but his overall tenure. I'd love to hear more feedback from you. So I appreciate everybody for hopping on and tuning in this afternoon. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me at Matt Watson Media on social, on all socials, Blue Sky and Twitter. Find us all, the Phillies team here at Philly Sports Network in Metro Philadelphia, at Philadelphia SN on Twitter and Blue Sky, as well as at Metro Philly. Check us out at phillysportsnetwork.com, and we really appreciate all the support. So thanks, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your Saturday.